She met him during a time when her life felt stuck. Days passed with the same routine, the same quiet evenings, and the same feeling that something was missing. When he entered her world, it felt like a sudden spark. He spoke softly, listened closely, and made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. He never rushed things at first. He shared small pieces of his life, just enough to build trust, just enough to sound honest. He told her he was married, but unhappy. He said the marriage had been empty for a long time. According to him, there was no warmth at home, no understanding, no affection. He painted a picture of a man trapped in a life he never wanted. She listened, nodding, believing every word. It felt easier to believe him than to question the story. After all, he sounded tired, worn down, and sincere. First, she told herself she was just a friend, someone who understood him when no one else did. She told herself she wasn't doing anything wrong by listening. But conversations grew longer. Messages arrived earlier in the morning and later at night. Compliments slipped in quietly. He said she brought him peace. He said talking to her felt like breathing again. She started waiting for his messages. She checked her phone often, even when she told herself not to. When he didn't reply quickly, her mood changed. When he did, her whole day felt brighter. Slowly, without realizing it, she became emotionally tied to him. He spoke often about his wife, though never with kindness. He described her as distant and cold. He said she no longer cared. He claimed she didn't understand him and never supported his dreams. Each story made the wife sound like a shadow, someone who had already given up. Hearing this made it easier for the woman to feel less guilty. If the marriage was already broken, then what harm was there? Over time, the line between emotional closeness and something more faded. He told her she was different. He said she was everything he had been missing. Those words settled deep in her heart. She began to believe she wasn't just an escape for him. She believed she was the answer. She asked once why he stayed married if he was so unhappy. He sighed and said it was complicated. He mentioned shared history, responsibilities, and the fear of starting over. He said he needed time. She accepted that. Love, she believed, required patience. As months passed, he grew bolder. He talked about a future where he could finally be free. He spoke of peace, laughter, and a life where he could be himself. When he spoke like that, she pictured herself beside him. She imagined simple mornings, shared meals, and quiet nights without secrets. She told herself she wasn't stealing anything. She believed love wasn't something that could be taken. If he chose her, then it meant she deserved to be chosen. She never saw the wife's face. She never heard her voice. That made it easier to forget there was another person on the other side of the story. The day he said the word divorce, her heart raced. He told her he had finally decided. He said he couldn't live a lie anymore. He said he wanted a fresh start. When she heard this, she felt a rush of relief and excitement. Felt like the moment she had been waiting for. She congratulated him, though she tried to hide how happy she felt. Inside, she felt proud. She felt like she had won something important. She believed her love had given him the courage to leave an unhappy life. She told herself she had saved him. That night, she replayed his words again and again. She imagined the wife hearing the news, imagined her shocked and silent. Without meaning to, she compared herself to someone she had never met. In her mind, she saw herself as younger in spirit, more understanding, more loving. She believed she was the better choice. He said the process would take time. Papers, conversations, and adjustments. She understood. She was willing to wait because now there was a clear ending in sight. The secret relationship no longer felt temporary. Felt like the beginning of something real. Friends noticed a change in her. She smiled more, walked with confidence, and spoke about the future in hopeful terms. She didn't share details, but she carried a quiet sense of victory. In her heart, she believed life was finally moving in her favor. When doubts tried to rise, she pushed them away. She told herself that every love story had obstacles. She believed that once the divorce was complete, everything would fall into place. She trusted his words because she wanted to. Questioning them felt like risking the dream she had already built in her mind. She never asked how the wife felt. She never asked what had really happened inside that marriage. She didn't want to know. Knowing might have made things complicated, and she didn't want complications anymore. She wanted clarity, happiness, and a sense of being chosen. As the days passed, she grew more attached to the idea of becoming the one standing beside him openly. No more hiding, no more waiting, no more being in the background. She believed she was stepping into a life that belonged to her now. What she didn't know was that every story has more than one side. She didn't know that the woman she had replaced was far stronger than she had been led to believe. And she didn't know that the same patterns that broke one life were already quietly shaping another. The day the divorce was finalized felt like a turning point in her life. She woke up with a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. The world felt lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted, though she wasn't quite sure whose weight it was. She remembered the day he first mentioned the divorce, the way his voice had carried both relief and guilt. She had held back tears then, but now, hearing the news officially, she let herself feel a surge of triumph. She told herself she was stepping into a life she had always imagined. Every thought about the future felt brighter. She pictured quiet mornings together, laughter during breakfast, and late evenings spent talking without fear of being caught. Every image was colored with hope. She shared some of it with close friends, who noticed her newfound energy. She didn't reveal details, only hints, but it was enough to make them ask questions. She smiled, avoiding specifics, and told them she was finally happy. In her heart, she felt like she had won something precious. The first weeks after the divorce were intoxicating. He was more present than ever, calling and messaging throughout the day. They met for long walks, for coffee, for quiet dinners. Every moment felt like confirmation that the hard wait was over. She savored it, letting herself imagine it was forever. The thrill of not being hidden anymore, of stepping into a life that seemed rightfully hers, made her heart race. Yet, even in moments of joy, small doubts tried to creep in. He still spoke sometimes of his old life, the memories of marriage, the moments that had hurt him. She listened politely, nodding, offering sympathy. She reminded herself that his past was just that, past. Her mind quickly pushed away lingering questions. After all, she had been promised a fresh start. She celebrated quietly at first. Friends noticed her lighter mood and praised her for finally finding happiness. She smiled, feeling proud, thinking she had earned this new life. She never mentioned the wife or the past too much, only focusing on what was to come. Every plan, every dream she spoke aloud was colored with the sense of victory. She told herself that she had been patient, that she had waited and that patience had finally been rewarded. Sometimes he would speak of the challenges ahead. Divorce was complicated, he said, not just legally but emotionally. He admitted that he was still adjusting, that old habits and memories still lingered. She nodded, reassuring him. She wanted him to feel understood, to know that she could be his support. That, too, gave her a sense of purpose. She believed she was doing what no one else could, helping him rebuild. They started spending more time together in public, and she felt a rush of pride every time they were seen. Simple gestures, a hand brushing against his, a shared smile, felt like milestones. Every glance from strangers or acquaintances seemed to affirm that she had finally stepped into a life that belonged to her. She carried herself differently, moving with a confidence she hadn't known before. In her mind, every victory belonged to her. But even in the midst of this celebration, small cracks began to show. Sometimes he seemed distant for no reason. Calls went unanswered for hours, and when they spoke, his tone was sometimes distracted. She told herself it was stress, work, or the lingering pain of divorce. She tried to be patient, to offer support rather than demand explanations. Yet, each unexplained pause left her heart uneasy. Still, she chose to focus on the good. After all, everything seemed perfect when she let herself imagine it that way. She began dreaming about the future in small ways. Weekends spent together, holidays, even conversations about home and family. Every plan reinforced her belief that she had won. She told herself that love was not only about feeling chosen but about creating a life together. Every step, she believed, was a move toward building that life. Every moment he smiled at her or shared a secret felt like confirmation that she had finally found her place. Friends noticed her obsession, though gently. They teased her lightly about being too focused on him, about imagining the future too soon. She laughed, brushing off their warnings, telling herself they didn't understand. To her, the joy she felt was real, tangible. Every day seemed to bring new reasons to celebrate. She felt like she had finally been recognized, finally chosen for the person she had always believed herself to be. She even started thinking about the wife occasionally, but only in passing. She remembered the stories he had told, how cold, distant, or uncaring the marriage had been. She believed that she could never compare to that life she hadn't lived. The wife, in her mind, was already a figure of the past, someone whose life had ended in failure, and she, the mistress, had stepped in at the right moment to claim what was hers. Yet moments of doubt lingered. Sometimes she would notice subtle hints that he still carried memories she didn't yet understand. A sigh at a certain time, a hesitation in speech, a sudden quietness. She tried to ask, but he brushed it off, promising that everything would be fine. Her heart wavered, but she refused to let it take over. She clung to the vision of happiness she had built in her mind, choosing belief over suspicion. The celebration became more public as they spent more days together. Meals, walks, shared experiences. They were no longer secret moments. Every shared smile in public reinforced the story she had been telling herself, that she had replaced the wife, that she was now the most important part of his life. She told herself that the world had finally recognized her place. Every laugh they shared in public seemed like a mark of victory, and she savored it fully. She didn't realize how quickly life could change. Her joy was real but fragile. She believed in the power of being chosen, in the power of love she thought had conquered the past. She didn't yet see that the past could still reach into the present, that old patterns could emerge, and that victory built on someone else's pain might not last as she imagined. Still, in these weeks after the divorce, she allowed herself to celebrate. She allowed herself to dream without boundaries. Every moment with him felt like proof that she had waited for the right time, that patience and belief had finally been rewarded. She believed that nothing could shake her new life. But even in celebration, shadows of the past lingered. Old habits, old patterns, and unseen truths were quietly shaping the days ahead. And she had yet to realize that the life she imagined as her triumph might not be as simple or as permanent as she believed. The excitement, the joy, the pride, all were real, but they were only the beginning of a journey that would test her understanding of love, choice, and consequence. Weeks passed, and the excitement she felt after the divorce slowly began to meet reality. At first, she ignored the small hints, the subtle reminders that life rarely followed the story she had imagined. But little by little, pieces of the past began to surface. She overheard mentions of the wife from mutual friends and noticed the way he sometimes paused when her name came up. She tried to brush it off, believing it wasn't important, but curiosity started to grow. It began with small stories. He spoke of shared history, of difficult choices and moments he had endured. He mentioned how she had supported him during challenges he hadn't anticipated. She nodded politely, listening, yet trying to keep her own triumph in the forefront of her mind. But each story added weight, a new layer of reality she hadn't considered. She began to sense that the marriage had been more than the failures he had described, that it had moments of strength and love she hadn't witnessed. She found herself thinking about the wife more often than she wanted. She realized she had only imagined the woman based on the stories he had told. She had pictured someone distant, uncaring, and unworthy of his love. Now, she was beginning to see a different picture, a life that she had not understood, a woman who had given quietly and endured patiently. Doubts began to creep into her mind, soft at first, then more insistent. One evening, he mentioned an anniversary they had quietly celebrated years before. He spoke with a mixture of nostalgia and regret. For the first time, she noticed a hint of emotion that he had never shown toward her. He talked about how the wife had been there when things were hard, how she had been patient, and how her presence had comforted him in ways he hadn't appreciated at the time. Hearing this made her stomach tighten. She hadn't expected to feel anything like jealousy, yet it surged in a way that shocked her. The stories continued to arrive in small pieces, unplanned and accidental. A message from a friend, a casual remark about the past, a shared memory he let slip. Each one chipped away at the sense of certainty she had carried. She began to see that the woman she had imagined as weak or cold was, in fact, strong and resilient. She had faced hardships, managed responsibilities, and had shown a quiet grace that the mistress had never witnessed firsthand. She struggled with her feelings. Part of her wanted to confront him, to demand the truth about the marriage. Another part wanted to ignore it, to cling to the story she had built in her mind. She spent nights thinking, turning over memories and conversations, trying to reconcile what she knew with what she had imagined. The picture of the ex-wife became more human, more real, and more impossible to dismiss. It became harder to celebrate her own life when the shadows of the past seemed to linger everywhere. She noticed the way he sometimes hesitated when speaking about decisions, the way he carried memories she had never shared. The more she learned, the more she realized that she had been given only a part of the story, the part that made her feel victorious. The rest had been hidden, unspoken, or overlooked. She began to question her role in his life. She thought about the reasons he had chosen to be with her, the timing of their connection, and the circumstances that led to the divorce. She realized that her presence had filled a void, but it hadn't erased the history, the depth, or the strength of the life that had existed before her. She wondered if she had truly understood the woman she had replaced, or if she had only replaced the image that had been created for her by his words. The more she learned, the more conflicted she felt. She wanted to feel pride and victory, but it became harder. She remembered the ease with which she had imagined the wife as powerless or uncaring. Now she realized that the real woman had been quietly strong, composed, and enduring. The contrast between the story she had believed and the reality she was discovering left her unsettled. This realization began to affect her interactions with him. She noticed how her reactions had changed, how she listened more, questioned more, and sometimes held back. She couldn't help but compare herself to the woman she had never met, a comparison that often left her feeling small and inadequate. She began to understand that being chosen wasn't the same as being valued, and that replacement was not victory. The man continued to rely on her for support and companionship, but she felt the subtle shift. She noticed how he occasionally looked distant, how he hesitated when speaking about certain events, and how memories seemed to linger in his mind in ways he hadn't shared. The mistress began to understand that his past life had not disappeared. It had left impressions that could not be erased by celebration or new beginnings. She started thinking about the wife more intentionally, wondering how she had endured the end of the marriage. She imagined her resilience, her ability to carry herself with dignity, and her quiet strength in the face of hardship. For the first time, the mistress realized that the woman she had dismissed or misunderstood had qualities she could never replace. This growing awareness brought with it a new kind of fear. She wondered if her happiness was built on fragile ground, if her life with him could ever match the depth and meaning of the life he had shared with his wife. She began to see that love and connection were not just about presence or attention, but about understanding, patience, and enduring commitment. The victories she had celebrated suddenly seemed smaller in comparison. The more she understood, the more she realized that being the new presence in someone's life was not the same as being the one who had shaped it. She began to see the complexity of relationships, the sacrifices that had been made, and the patience that had been required to sustain them. She recognized that the story she had believed was simple was actually layered and nuanced, filled with choices, compromises, and quiet endurance. She felt a mix of emotions: admiration for the woman she had replaced, guilt for her own excitement at the divorce, and uncertainty about her own place in the world. She realized that life was not a simple story of winners and losers, and that triumph over another's loss was not as clear as she had imagined. Her feelings of victory became tempered with humility and reflection. The realization grew slowly but steadily. Every story she heard, every memory shared, and every detail she noticed added to her understanding. She began to see the ex-wife not as an obstacle or a rival, but as a person with depth, courage, and a life lived fully. This understanding reshaped the way she thought about herself, her choices, and her relationship. By the end of this period, she knew that the celebration she had indulged in after the divorce was incomplete. She had believed in a simple victory, but now she saw the layers of life that could not be undone. She understood that she had entered a story already in progress, and that her role, while meaningful, could never erase the past or the strength of the woman she had once dismissed. This awareness changed her perspective, reshaping her joy into something more reflective. She still cared for him, still cherished their moments together, but she carried with her a quiet recognition of the complexity of love, the endurance of human strength, and the subtle truths that cannot be replaced or rewritten. The celebration of a new life had become a lesson in humility, awareness, and the understanding that victory in life is rarely as simple as it seems as time passed. The excitement of being with him after the divorce began to mingle with unease. She had imagined that their life together would be simple and joyful, filled with constant affection and reassurance. Instead, subtle patterns began to emerge that she hadn't noticed before. He still relied on her for companionship and support, but the comfort she had imagined turned into quiet tension, small disappointments, and moments of unexplained distance. She started noticing how he repeated the same mistakes she had heard about in his marriage. Promises were made and broken. Plans were postponed. Explanations were vague. At first, she tried to brush these off, reminding herself that everyone had flaws and that patience was part of love. But the patterns were undeniable. The way he avoided difficult conversations, the way he sometimes disappeared emotionally, it all felt familiar in a way that alarmed her. One evening, as they sat in silence after a minor disagreement, she realized something uncomfortable. The wife had endured these same behaviors for years. The patterns she had thought were unique to her own relationship with him were not new. They had existed long before she arrived. The recognition hit her with a mixture of fear and humility. She was not replacing the wife. She was stepping into the same challenges, the same emotional cycles. This awareness changed the way she viewed their time together. She began to see that being chosen was not the same as being valued. She was important, but in ways that were complicated and sometimes fleeting. The more she saw the reality of his behavior, the more she realized that love required more than presence and desire. It required patience, understanding, and a willingness to navigate difficulties she hadn't anticipated. She reflected on the stories he had told her about his marriage. At first, they had painted a picture of failure and weakness. Now, she saw those stories differently. She understood that the wife had faced challenges with strength and grace, enduring patterns of behavior and moments of conflict that the mistress had just begun to encounter. Admiration mixed with guilt. The woman she had dismissed now seemed almost heroic in her quiet endurance. Her days became quieter, marked by small moments of doubt and reflection. She noticed how her confidence wavered when faced with his unpredictable moods. She noticed how the excitement she had felt immediately after the divorce was slowly giving way to the reality of routine, responsibility, and the complexity of human emotion. Every unfulfilled promise and every silent moment reminded her that relationships were never as simple as imagined. Friends began to notice her change in mood, though she did not speak openly about it. She laughed less freely, worried more often, and sometimes seemed lost in thought. They assumed she was simply adjusting to a new relationship, but the truth was deeper. She was realizing that she had not replaced anyone, that her place was not as permanent or secure as she had believed. She was stepping into a role shaped by history and human imperfection. Her reflection extended to herself. She wondered if her excitement had blinded her to reality. She thought about the happiness she had felt when the divorce was finalized, the pride she had taken in what she thought was her victory. Now, she understood that life was more complex than victory or loss. Love was not about conquering someone else's space. It was about building something real, which required patience and understanding she was only beginning to grasp. She also noticed his moments of vulnerability, the ways he would show weakness or confusion. She realized these were not signs of strength but reminders that the human heart was complicated, and that past experiences could not be erased. He was still learning, still adjusting, and still carrying the weight of a life that had come before. She had stepped into that weight not as a replacement, but as someone learning the same lessons all over again. This understanding created a new sense of humility in her. She realized that the wife had endured the same patterns, faced the same challenges, and had done so with dignity and patience. The comparison was inevitable. She began to see herself not as a victorious figure, but as someone entering a story with consequences she could not ignore. Her triumph had been superficial. The deeper reality was far more complex. Moments of tension became more frequent. Misunderstandings arose, small disagreements escalated, and silence filled spaces that had once been easy and joyful. Each incident reminded her of the lessons she was learning. That love was complicated, that history mattered, and that human behavior did not change simply because circumstances did. She began to see that she had not replaced the wife. She had stepped into a life with its own challenges, ones that she had not anticipated. She began to measure her happiness differently. Instead of looking for immediate joy, she focused on understanding, patience, and presence. She realized that being with him was not about winning a life or replacing someone else, but about navigating a shared reality with honesty and care. The initial excitement had given way to deeper reflection, and with it, a new sense of respect for the life she had entered. Her relationship with him became quieter but more deliberate. She listened more, asked questions thoughtfully, and measured her own reactions. She wanted to avoid the mistakes of the past, to avoid the cycles that had once caused pain. Every conversation became an opportunity to understand him and herself, every moment a lesson in patience and clarity. She also began to see the consequences of her earlier assumptions. The pride she had felt in her supposed victory was replaced by humility. She understood that life could not be won like a game, and that emotional connection required effort, understanding, and acceptance. She started to see that the wife's strength had never been about defeating anyone. It had been about enduring, adapting, and remaining true to herself. By the end of this period, she had shifted from celebration to awareness. Her excitement was replaced by reflection, her triumph replaced by understanding. She knew now that she had not truly replaced anyone. She had stepped into a story that carried lessons, challenges, and human complexity. She understood that her role was not as permanent or as powerful as she had imagined, but that it was real in its own way, shaped by choices, patience, and effort. The days were no longer marked by simple joy or victory. Instead, they were measured by insight, reflection, and a growing sense of responsibility. She had learned that relationships required more than desire, more than presence, and more than imagined triumph. They required understanding, patience, and humility. In the quiet moments, she often thought about the wife, not as a rival, but as a figure of endurance and strength. She realized that the life she had entered was not simple, and that replacing someone was never the whole story. The patterns she had once dismissed now appeared clearly, and she began to understand the depth and complexity of human connection. She still cared for him, still cherished their moments together, but she carried a new perspective. The triumph she had once celebrated was now a lesson in awareness. She understood that victory built on someone else's loss was fragile, and that the reality of life required more than imagination or desire. Her celebration had given way to insight, and with it, a deeper understanding of love, choice, and consequence. Time moved slowly, and with it, her understanding of the life she had stepped into deepened. She could no longer look at their relationship with the excitement that had carried her after the divorce. Every moment together was now layered with reflection, memory, and awareness of the life that had existed before her. The victory she had once imagined had been replaced by a quiet recognition of reality. She noticed the smallest details that she had ignored before. The way he sometimes sighed at memories, the way he hesitated when speaking about decisions, the way his expression would cloud briefly when mentioning the past. Each moment reminded her that life was complex, that human hearts carried experiences that could not be erased. She had not replaced anyone, She had entered a life already shaped by history. First, she felt fear. Fear that she had misjudged the situation. Fear that her happiness was built on fragile ground. Fear that she had misunderstood her own role. She reflected on the joy she had felt immediately after the divorce, the pride in thinking she had finally won. That pride was now tempered by awareness, humility, and a sense of responsibility she hadn't anticipated. She began to observe how he treated her in ways that mirrored his past behavior. Promises were sometimes vague, attention was inconsistent, and emotional distance appeared in patterns she had not noticed before. She recognized that she was repeating a history she had only recently begun to understand. The woman she had dismissed or imagined as weak had endured similar moments for years. The recognition brought both guilt and respect. Her feelings became more complicated. She loved the moments of connection, yet she could not ignore the patterns of disappointment. Every laugh shared, every comforting gesture, was now balanced with reflection on what she had learned. She understood that relationships required more than desire and presence. They required patience, endurance, and understanding. She realized that being chosen did not equal being secure or invincible. She began to see the wife clearly for the first time. Not as an obstacle, not as a rival, but as a person with strength, patience, and dignity. The stories she had been told were only fragments. The real woman had faced life with grace, endured hardships, and had quietly shaped the life they had shared. She realized that admiration and understanding, not triumph, were the proper responses. This awareness changed her perspective. The moments she had celebrated after the divorce now appeared in a different light. She understood that happiness built on the idea of replacing someone else was incomplete. True fulfillment required understanding, respect, and an appreciation for the depth of human experience. The celebration she had indulged in was now tempered with humility. She also began to reflect on herself. She questioned her earlier assumptions, her belief in her own victory, and the ease with which she had dismissed the wife. She recognized that she had entered a world with its own rules, its own history, and its own consequences. She understood that her choices carried weight, and that her happiness was connected to awareness and reflection as much as to desire. Her interactions with him became more deliberate. She listened carefully, asked questions thoughtfully, and considered her responses with care. She wanted to avoid repeating mistakes, to approach the relationship with insight rather than assumption. Every conversation was measured, every gesture purposeful. She realized that love required effort, honesty, and awareness, not just excitement and connection. At the same time, she began to think about the consequences of her choices. She realized that the wife had stepped away from challenges with dignity and strength, while she had entered the same patterns without fully understanding them. The realization brought a mixture of guilt and humility. She understood that life was not a game, and that emotional victory was not as simple as she had imagined. As days turned into weeks, she saw the subtle effects of the life she had entered. There were moments of tension, small misunderstandings, and unspoken frustrations. Each reminded her that relationships were layered, that history mattered, and that patterns could not be easily broken. She had not replaced the past. She had become part of it, learning the lessons that had already been written. This awareness deepened her compassion. She understood both the man she loved and the woman she had dismissed. She saw the endurance, patience, and strength that had shaped the life she now inhabited. She felt admiration for the wife and humility for herself. She realized that victory was not in replacing someone else, but in understanding, adapting, and carrying the lessons of human experience forward. Her joy became quieter, reflective, and grounded in understanding. She cherished moments with him, but she also respected the depth of the life that had existed before her. She learned that fulfillment was not about triumph over another, but about presence, care, and awareness. Every smile, every conversation, every shared moment was now infused with insight and respect. By the end of this period, she had transformed. The initial excitement of replacing the wife had faded, replaced by reflection, understanding, and growth. She understood that her presence in his life carried responsibilities and lessons. She realized that relationships were not won or lost. They were lived, navigated, and understood. She continued to care for him, still enjoyed shared moments, and still imagined a future together, but with awareness. Her triumph had become humility, her excitement had become reflection, and her celebration had become a quiet understanding. She had learned that happiness was not about replacing someone, but about navigating life with insight, patience, and compassion. In the quiet, she often thought of the wife, no longer as a rival, but as a figure of strength and endurance. She understood that the life she had stepped into was shaped by choices, patience, and human complexity. She had learned that being part of someone's life required more than desire. It required understanding, respect, and reflection. The story concluded not with victory, but with awareness. She realized that the lessons of love, patience, and humility were far more valuable than the fleeting joy of perceived triumph. She had entered a life already shaped by history, and she had learned to live within it with awareness, care, and respect. The mistress rejoiced no longer in replacing someone else. She understood the depth of human connection and the quiet strength it required. Her journey had taught her that true understanding was the only lasting form of fulfillment.